It was ridiculous for a young man in his 20s to be born with a half-human umbilical cord and still live as a half-human. However, when the handsome bastard Song Si-yeol made eye contact with one guy, his cute face turned red. Sunam looked at his hand anxiously and remembered what his father had told him about his mark. He explained that if it suddenly lit up or appeared on his watch, it would be a reason to run away as quickly as possible, as it was a sign of danger and that the enemy was near him. The guy realized that his chances of survival were decreasing with each passing minute, so he started thinking about how to get out of here. However, his opponent was stronger. He grabbed Sunam's arm and pushed him brazenly against the wall. Song Si-yeol asked him where he was going in such a hurry and said that he was going to try rabbit meat. Some time before, Sunam's mother had walked him to school and was worried if he had taken his depression medication. The boy looked back and said that he had eaten them earlier. However, the woman didn't believe him and insisted on asking him anyway. Finally, he agreed and took the bottle with him. His mom smiled and asked him to contact them as soon as he got there. She also said that he needed to take them on time. The woman was outraged that the boy was pretending that she didn't know anything. A few minutes later, Sunam was already standing at the bus stop and constantly looking around. Many thoughts were swarming in his head. On the one hand, he was happy that half of the population in this place he called Mold was human, and that was wonderful. On the other hand, he was saddened by the fact that the other half were animals, and they all lived next to each other all the time. Suddenly, the boy was a little scared because a stranger stood next to him, who looked very much like a predator. However, there was something else about him that worried him. He thought he had seen him somewhere before. So he remembered how his friends came up to him at school, grabbed him by the neck as a joke, and asked him what he was doing there, because a test was about to start. One of his classmates suggested that Sunam must have studied hard and learned everything well. He smiled and confirmed that studying was his everything. He also offered to help them if they could find a pen for him. The boys started laughing as they looked for what the boy had asked for and noticed that Sunam was the strongest candidate for the scholarship. However, he replied that he had never received one. His friend assured him that this was not fair because he was very smart and always tried hard. The guy agreed with him and said that he was already tired of coming here, although he admitted that he realized that if he didn't, it would be worse. Suddenly, one of them pointed his finger at the back row and emphasized that the scum sitting there were something. He spoke about one of them and said that he was on a scholarship and never talked to anyone. Looking at the guy sitting there with his eyes closed, he added that it was pointless to live just because you are half human. However, Sunam did not hear what his friend said next. He was surprised that he was not mistaken and that the guy was half his age. The boy smiled but thought that if he turned to face him again, he would think that he was staring at him, or, even better, that he was in love with him. Suddenly, his dreamy state was shattered when he heard his friend whispering to him, asking what he was laughing at. The classmate began to shout and insist that he, as a young man, should start receiving a scholarship. However, Sunam just laughed at his remarks. His friends began to mention the fact that he was younger than them, as he had entered the university early when he was still a minor. They also explained that when he returned, everyone stared at him because he looked 20 years old. Sunam was a little embarrassed by these words and asked again, smiling, if he really looked that age. At the same time, one of the guys noticed some medicine on his table and started asking him why he needed it, suggesting that he might be in poor health. But he replied that he was just allergic. However, as soon as he began to clarify that he was allergic to sunlight, Song Si-yeol immediately regained consciousness. From that moment on, he listened intently to what they were saying, although since then it was just idle chatter about what happens when a guy doesn't eat for a long time. In the evening, the guys went to a cafe. It was very crowded and noisy. Everyone was busy doing their own thing. One of the friends complained that he had failed the test and jokingly asked if the professor would allow him to take it again. Another mentioned that they would hold a general meeting here tonight. Chewing on his dinner, Sunam asked the boy not to speak so badly of the teacher because he was not as bad as he thought. So they raised their glasses and clinked them together, noting that they were drinking to themselves tonight. As he listened to his friends say that if he failed a couple more tests, he would have to prepare for the service, he saw a familiar face across from him. Song Si-yeol, in turn, had also noticed his eyes and their company for a long time. However, he behaved very restrained and calmly. At the same time, the guys did not stop discussing the professor. While one of them hoped that he would give him a second chance, the other laughed at the fact that he was talking about him as a bloody murderer. Sunam could not support their conversation at that moment. He watched Song Si-yeol for a long time, and then asked if it was true that there were people in this school. And then, without taking his eyes off the boy, he listened to him say that less than half of the school is human or half human. And the whole question is what they look like. One of his friends wondered how all these fevers were affecting them. However, Sunam knew about it, not by hearsay. His hands suddenly began to tremble. After that, there was a pain in his wrist, so he realized that he urgently needed to go out. The guy got up from the table and said he had to go to the bathroom, which made his friends laugh because they started joking that he just wanted to run away from them. When he finally got to that point, Song Si-yeol smiled and realized that something interesting was about to happen. He put the instruments on the table and told his company that he needed to leave for a while. Meanwhile, when Sunam was away from his friends, he began to feel his body tremble even more. He assumed that he must have been frightened when he made eye contact with the boy, and that's why he felt a slight pain. Most of all, his wrist was bothering him, so he couldn't understand what was causing it and why it was happening to his hand. Suddenly, he remembered the words of his father, who had told him never to take off this watch, even though it was quite heavy. He explained that no one should see the symbols underneath it, and that it was very important. So when Sunam was still young, he asked if it was because of the thieves he had told him about. The man confirmed it. He also added that if they were nearby, they would give a signal. Therefore, he told his son that he would need to tell him about it. The father emphasized that in case of danger, his only option would be to run as fast as possible. Finally, he summarized that if these signs hurt, or perhaps his arm hurt where these signs were drawn, it would mean that danger was nearby. Patting his son on the head, he said that he should run away from it as fast as he could. One thing Sunaim did not understand was why they hurt so suddenly, because he did not feel any danger now. Suddenly, he heard someone's footsteps. The stranger said that, in his case, the only place to hide was in the toilet. He also added that, regardless of whether he was stupid or naive, he would be found no matter what it took. The guy covered his mouth with his hand, trying not to make a sound. However, his wrist was hurting more and more. Song Si-yeol was very persistent. He asked me to stop playing hide-and-seek with him and forced him to come out. After that, he went to one stall and said that he smelled like rabbit meat, so he wanted to taste it. Sunaim felt that something very strange was happening to him, but he could not understand what it was and why his hands were shaking so much. Finally, he heard the footsteps getting closer and closer, and then the guy stopped at his booth. The guy's arm was just burning with pain, and no matter how hard he tried to muffle it, he couldn't do it. So he remembered his father's words and decided that, since it couldn't get any worse, there was only one way out: to open the door and run away. However, he failed to do so because the man was much stronger than him. He also asked where he was going. Song Si-yeol insisted that he wanted to try rabbit meat. He said that he could smell a very pleasant odor and assumed that it must be very tender and tasty. When the man came closer to him, Sunam looked him in the eye, trying to figure out what the hell he was going to do. Song Si-yeol grabbed his shirt, kissed him, and then bit his neck. As it turned out, he had been hunting him since class. Tears ran down Sunam's cheeks. He didn't understand why this was happening to him because he hadn't done anything wrong. Suddenly, he heard a loud crack and someone else entered the restroom. Song Si-yeol looked around, asking who was there. The stranger said he came here because he smelled blood. He furrowed his brow angrily. waiting for his victim. Song Si-yeol replied that he was not dead yet. He also said that if he decided to play hide-and-seek, he would have to hide until the end. However, when he told the beast that none of this was worth it to come running here like a madman, it only got even more angry. Song Si-yeol smiled and asked him how he could have gotten to this point. Then he told him that he was like a monkey. After that, he pushed the beast in the face and beat him up, so that the entire toilet was covered in blood. As soon as Su-nam started to come to, he thought he was dying, because his whole body was trembling. He sadly remembered that he had completely forgotten to take the medicine his mother had given him, and wished he had been able to foresee all this. Suddenly a woman entered the restroom. In front of her was a man in a white shirt and a boy who was bleeding. At the same time, Song Si-yeol was sitting next to the beast and trying to see some kind of mark or sign on it. It turned out that what he saw indicated a huge breed of monkey. However, he was unable to find out anything else, as everything was almost erased. Finally, he pressed his hand to its throat and began to ask it what the symbols were. And when the beast did not answer, he killed it, saying that the rules were set by the Elder Council. Some time later, Song Si-yeol's grandmother asked him on the balcony why he had been spending so much time at school lately. She said that although she didn't know the reason, she wondered why he hadn't been arrested. The boy continued to spin the Rubik's Cube in his hands and replied that he was just waiting. In addition, he said that he did not have an order to destroy it. The grandmother understood what he meant and asked him if he really wanted to wait for instructions, although she found it rather strange. In the end, Song Si-yeol asked her to ignore it and suggested that they just wait for orders from the center. However, she understood what had happened. In her opinion, there were a lot of compliant people in the school, so the boy could smell it and it drove him crazy. She recalled helping her grandson pick up Su-nam that evening and asking him if it was true that the child was his friend. The boy was shaking and feverish, and he was constantly delirious, asking his mother to help him. Song Si-yeol asked why his grandmother was taking the puppy away, when she should just take him to the hospital. Suddenly they heard footsteps behind them. It was a man who came closer and said that he would clean up the traces of the dead monkey. Song Si-yeol held his head and explained irritably that it was all because of Su-nam, who had simply bait him. The man reminded him that he had killed a lot of half-men and violated the food chain agreement with upper-class people. Therefore, he would now have to explain everything to the senior council. However, Song Si-yeol asked him what would happen if he didn't want to do this. He said that he would definitely have to go through the disciplinary process. The guy was seriously angry and started shouting at the man. However, the lawyer, in response, asked to continue working with them. After that, looking at the three of them, he said that he had prepared a car and offered a ride. Su-nam did not understand anything. He had a bad headache, but he tried to listen to what was happening around him. Eventually, when he came to and noticed Song Si-yeol standing next to him, he was speechless. But Song Si-yeol told him to get some more sleep and said that only then would he be able to answer questions. Song Si-yeol squinted his eyes and added irritably that he was too lazy to explain everything, so he advised him to get some rest for now. Su-nam asked if they were not in Gimhyeongdong and said that he needed to go to the hospital first. Suddenly, he was even more surprised when he heard a woman's voice. His grandmother asked him if it was really that bad. She also added that before they could go to Gimhyeongdong, they had to meet with the senior chairman of the board of directors first. Su-nam was confused because he didn't know what kind of director she was. However, to his surprise, the woman replied that it was probably because of the animal movement. These words confused the boy even more. He asked if it meant he was being hunted. Su-nam began to insist that he was half-human. However, his grandmother advised him to try touching his ears first. Looking at the boy, she noticed that they were raised and visible to everyone. She also emphasized that it was still a question of whether he was human or not, explaining that if it was the other way around, it meant that he belonged to a species of animal. Su-nam was shocked and could not understand how he got ears. So he had to admit to himself that he was not who he thought he was. Eventually, after a while, they ended up at the same building. It was a hospital, however, not for people, but for animals. Sunam didn't remember what happened to him when they arrived, but it turned out that he was lying on a bed, bandaged in some places. The only thing he could feel was that his neck hurt a lot and he couldn't move it. Later, as soon as he started to come to, he noticed a woman laughing hard in front of him and asking him if something had happened. She asked the boy if he was okay and emphasized that if he were a human, he would have more problems. Finally, the grandmother reached for the bottle on the nightstand and said that she had bought him some water. She also asked how his wound was, if it hurt. After that, she said that the doctor said he would get better soon. Then she told the surprised Sunam that Song Si-yeol was not someone who preys on innocent animals, and that he was currently in court. As the woman poured water into his glass, Sunam began to wonder why he was in jail. So the grandmother explained that it was because he had bitten him. She added that the predator who did it deserved to be punished. Meanwhile, Song Si-yeol was sitting in court. He didn't care at all about what they were going to tell him, so he behaved completely calmly. The judge said that she had received a report, and it said that the boy had killed a monkey and injured an innocent person. Then she asked if Song Si-yeol wanted to add anything to what he had just said. The boy's eyes sparkled, and he began to explain that the target was a large species of monkey that was in a state of wildness. And this, in his opinion, was a reason for a summary judgment. The judge asked if this was true. The lawyer confirmed it and said that he could not have concealed the transformation. The case turned out to be quite complicated, so the judge said that they would study the issue, but now they needed to take a break. Song Si-yeol was outraged and began to question whether they were doing the right thing in this case. The judge laughed and repeated once again that the boy had bitten an innocent person, and predators at the top of the food chain should not harm the class below. Several other people were watching the trial. The two boys were getting bored, so one of them put his head on the other's shoulder. Then, after saying that this was a basic agreement that they had to abide by, he went ahead and put his hand on his partner's knee. The judge's son noticed this and was disgusted. He could hardly contain his displeasure. However, they continued to do their business, despite the fact that there was quite a serious conversation going on around them. The man was already very angry, gritting his teeth as he thought about what he could do to make the two stop it. However, Kim Se-han just smiled and continued to pretend to listen about how higher-level predators shouldn't attack relatively weak groups. Won Woo-jin was blushing with pleasure and didn't pay any attention to what they were saying. The judge, meanwhile, emphasized that disciplinary action for reckless behavior was not dependent on mission accomplishment. So they were both seemingly there, but in fact they were thinking and doing something else, which began to irritate many people. Even though Song Si-yeol was preoccupied with his excuse, he also noticed that something was wrong between the two of them. So he couldn't stand it any longer and started shouting, saying that first of all, they needed to get rid of that bastard. However, at this point, a woman from Sunam entered the courtroom. The latter asked if he was the one in question. He pointed at himself and asked if it was true that he had said that he needed to be disposed of. Song Si-yeol's brow furrowed in anger, realizing that the situation was getting tense and things could go wrong. However, the judge smiled, put her hand to her chin, and allowed Su-name to enter the courtroom. However, Song Si-yeol was not at all satisfied with this course of events. He abruptly stood up and asked the boy, calling him an earwig, why he was here. He began to calm him down, explaining that he had come here only because he was told to do so. Suddenly, the judge admitted that she had called him. And then she explained to Su-nam that this was the place where the elders of Gim-yong-dong gather. After that, the woman introduced herself. She said she was the senior president of the council, and her name was Yang Yun-hee. Su-nam was very surprised to see such a respected person sitting in front of him. He assumed that she must be their leader. The judge told him that she had heard that he was studying at the same school as Song Si-yeol, so she offered him to work with them. They both accepted the offer with surprise. However, while Song Si-yeol thought the judge was crazy for doing this, Su-nam didn't know how to react at all. He was boiling with anger and asked if she knew what she was talking about and if she knew what herbivores did to them. Yang Yun-hai tried to calm him down because she knew better what to do in this situation. However, Song Si-yeol did not want to hear anything. He said that he didn't know what she wanted to achieve from the lowest link in the food chain, so he asked her to stop talking nonsense. However, the judge's son got involved in the argument. He was very angry and emphasized that the boy had no right to say this to his mother. The woman put her hand in front of him, thus trying to explain to him that he should not interfere. At that very second, Song Si-yeol continued. He told me not to try to involve others because he doesn't live in Gimyongdong. Squinting his eyes, the guy said that he was sure that the rabbit would not help them in any way, so he advised them to cure it and let it go. However, Su-nam lifted the sleeve of his shirt and showed a secret symbol. He explained that it was not a rabbit, but a dog. Song Si-yeol was not impressed. He said he didn't care who he was, because it wouldn't help them. Suddenly, he was interrupted by the judge. She asked Su-nam if there were really two animals living in his body. She emphasized that there should be another mark on his wrist. The boy confidently replied that it was, which surprised his grandmother, who was standing next to him. The judge asked him if it was a rabbit symbol, since he had a herbivore smell. He laughed, looking her in the eye, and said that it was correct, even though he was a defective person. Kim Se-han finally started to join the conversation and asked if there were really inferior people. Su-nam replied that when they have symbols on their bodies, they are no different from an ordinary person, but they are called inferior. Song Si-yeol asked who had told him this, because he had never heard anyone explain it like that. So Su-nam came closer to him and told him that he had heard it from his parents when he was a child. However, Won Woo-jin laughed at him and said that he was not really a human being, since he was born with symbols. He also told the bewildered Su-nam that basically half of the people have the form of the beast sealed in them. So he added that as soon as the sign is cancelled, the true appearance is revealed. So he asked again if he was a human. Su-nam tried to justify himself somehow and said that in his entire life he had never shown signs of an animal. The woman next to him smiled and calmly said that it was because he had grown up on medication. She showed him a bottle and emphasized that his parents had forced him to take this medicine, asking if it was true. Su-nam confirmed this and at the same time was shocked himself, because all this time he thought it was allergy medicine. However, his grandmother explained that if he eats it, his sense of smell does not allow him to smell the pheromones. And she reminded him that he hadn't taken the medicine on time, so now was the time to find out if he really had an allergy or not. It turned out that his parents had deceived him, because despite the fact that he had not taken the pills, he could still stand in the light. Su-nam couldn't believe it, so he stared at the sun for a few more minutes. But nothing happened. Finally, Kim Se-han came up to him and asked if he could call him a rabbit from now on. He replied that he hadn't gotten used to it yet. He also noticed that he still looked more like a dog, even though he had blood from both animals. Kim Se-han came closer, smiled, and emphasized that the boy smelled like a rabbit, and he could smell it well. And trying to touch him, he added that dogs are not pets that just wag their tails. Finally, Kim Se-han was very close to him and asked if he was sociable. Su-nam replied that yes, probably. Suddenly, Song Si-yeol grabbed his hand and advised the man to wash his hands first, before touching Su-nam. He noted that he had seen everything he did during the court hearing with the guy sitting next to him. Kim Se-han explained that he was exaggerating, and then tried to change the subject and asked if they were really from the same school, and if they were close. Song Si-yeol emphasized that he didn't have to answer such questions, although he said that it would have been better if he had told him everything. Kim Se-han emphasized that in any case, he needed to call Won Woo-jin immediately. And when he saw how Su-nai reacted to the liquid that was left on his hand after they touched, he said that it was fun to watch. However, when he asked Song Si-yeol if he wanted to comfort the rabbit, The boy froze in place, not knowing what to say. At the same time, Sunam tried to make excuses and began to say that it wasn't what they thought it was. Kim Se-han didn't need any explanations. He noted that the instincts of beastmen are quite exhausting. The guy kept catching fire like a match and saying that he hadn't felt anything like that and hadn't even thought about it. He joked that it wasn't true that Su Name was a cross between a dog and a rabbit because his sense of smell proved it. The boy could not take it anymore. He blushed and tried to ask for a chance to explain. Song Si-yeol knew that it was useless to argue with him and tried to calm him down by asking him to stop talking about it. In the end, Kim Se-han picked up the phone and said he needed to contact his partner, promising to bring them together. Sunam was shocked and said he didn't understand what he meant. In fact, his thoughts were confused, and he wondered how he could escape. But he added that the guy had just learned that he was an animal man, so he should learn about how these creatures have fun. After that, he picked up the phone and told Won Woo-jin that there are interesting activities when the senses are sharper than human ones. It didn't take long for him to head towards his partner, happily dreaming about what he would have to do. However, all of his thoughts were dispelled when he saw Su Nam and Song Si-yeol come out of the office holding hands. He stood in their way and told the latter that he was just following the guy. Then he joked that he had never seen a rabbit's thigh. Squinting his eyes, he continued to talk about the speculation about the rabbit's tail. However, the boys quietly walked past him, ignoring all these words. Unfortunately, they couldn't get away with it. The latter, however, came to his senses and asked Song Si-yeol why he was not giving him the rabbit. Sunam no longer interfered. He covered his mouth with his hand because he felt very ashamed. Suddenly, he looked to the left with his side vision and noticed a strange room with an open door. At the same second, a guy grabbed him by the hood and dragged him inside, asking him not to ask any questions because they would sort it out inside. Sunam was a little confused and asked what exactly would need to be dealt with. However, when he heard that he was suggesting that he let off steam on his own, he couldn't contain his emotions. Song Si-yeol started shouting at him and assured him that they had no other choice, and that if he didn't do it, he would have to go to Won Woo-jin. The boy was confused. He was very ashamed, but he realized that he probably had no other choice. Song Si-yeol emphasized that no matter what pheromones he spread, no fools would be able to enter because it was safe, and how the door locked from the inside. Sunam closed his eyes, not believing that this was all happening to him in earnest, thinking that everyone around him had gone crazy. So, when he realized that he had no other choice, he did what his boyfriend asked him to do, and everything was resolved. The next day, at home, he tried to read the book about the history of the Beastmen carefully. However, no matter how hard he tried to understand what was being said, everything was very confusing in his head. So, putting the book on the table, he began to think about everything himself. To him, it all sounded like nonsense. In addition, he was worried that his parents had not told him about it. And the main problem was how he would go to school tomorrow after what had happened. He was disgusted, realizing that Song Si-yeol had heard everything, although he hoped that the door was thick and the sound might not reach him. After all, he remembered that it was the boy who had opened it and ordered him to come out. So he assured himself that he had no intention of eavesdropping. He also told him to take a shower, as he embarrassingly admitted that he had only washed his hands. Song Si-yeol grabbed him and immediately took him to a place where there was hot water and he could wash himself. After that, he put his hand over his mouth and ordered him to immediately use all the products that were on the shelves there. The only thing that bothered Sunam at the time was that the shower had a glass door through which everything was visible. Moreover, he didn't want to do it when he saw a crowd of people standing in the doorway who were already talking about it. Noticing this, Song Si-yeol called them obscenities and angrily kicked the door shut. Sunam began to smile nervously. He hadn't expected his new friend to have such a strong temper. The latter, in turn, remarked that the guy might not even think of coming out until he washed himself until he was squeaky clean. Sunam was frightened and asked him not to be nervous and agreed to do whatever he was told. In the end, the first drops of water finally hit his body. He tried to wash himself thoroughly while thinking about the guy. He was a little surprised that he was sitting on the couch with his back to him and not going anywhere. However, he didn't know that his smell was also affecting Song Si-yeol himself, who was trying to wait until the scent disappeared. While he was thinking about this, he suddenly heard a soft knock on the wall that he hadn't expected. Song Si-yeol looked back in the boy's direction in anger and began to ask him irritably what he wanted. It turned out that Su-nam had asked him to bring a towel, as there was nothing nearby to wipe himself. He also pointed to his legs and explained that he had bruises where he had received a blood transfusion, so he asked if it was normal. In addition, he admitted that his eyes were blurry. He was swimming from time to time and felt a little nauseous. After these words, he began to feel that he was not in control of his body and was just falling. The last thing he saw was Song Si-yeol rushing to his aid. So now it's been bothering him, because losing consciousness in front of a guy is the most horrible thing that has ever happened to him. His parents did not understand that something was wrong with their son, but they did not dare to ask him about it. At the same time, Su-nam was looking for an excuse for his actions and assumed that he had fallen because of anemia, so Song Si-yeol took care of him from then on. The boy couldn't stop laughing nervously from the horror of waiting for tomorrow, because he didn't know how to look him in the eye now. At the same time, other events were happening in Song Si-yeol's family. Digging through the meat in the refrigerator, his grandmother was looking for something very carefully. Suddenly, her grandson called out to her from behind, so she had to be distracted for a while to give him time. The boy suddenly offered to play the cymbal. After that, he threw it right away in the woman's direction. However, she managed to catch it almost near her head. She got angry and asked him what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Then she threw the plate back, accusing him of running out of meat. She also ordered him to start cooking dinner. The guy fell to the floor feeling a hell of a pain, although he was subconsciously looking for these feelings. He thought that if he got a good beating on the head, he would forget everything that happened that day with Su-nam. However, it didn't work. Song Si-yeol irritably recalled how he felt when he saw the boy in the shower and what he did when he lost consciousness. The woman noticed that her grandson was not feeling well, but she thought he was pretending to go crazy. The next morning, Song Si-yeol was bent over his desk, covering his face with his hands. Suddenly, he heard someone talking to him, so he raised his head and turned toward the person speaking. It was Su-nam. He came closer, smiling, and asked the boy for his phone number. The guy, squinting his eyes, replied that he would not give him such information, so he should not get it. But, much to his surprise, Su-nam said that he had done a good thing by getting the number from the council chairman in advance. Despite the fact that Song Si-yeol was angry and asked who authorized him to take his number, the guy offered to give him his own. Gritting his teeth, he replied that he didn't want it at all. Instead, he asked to delete the number he had been given. But it was too late. Su-nam had already heard the first rings, which meant that Song Si-yeol now had his number. While the phone was ringing on the desk, Su-nam explained that the chairman of the council told him that if he didn't want to die, he needed to stay with him all the time. He added that the woman told him that no matter what kind of situation he was in, he would deal with it. However, it was very strange for him. He began to ask loudly why he needed to be rescued. Su-nam smiled and answered that it was because he was helping the guy with his task. Song Si-yeol asked if he knew what role the chairman of the board had given him. He also asked if the boy was really that stupid. Su-nam, rubbing his neck with his hand, replied that he knew everything. Then he explained that he just had to attract attention. He asked him to tell it like it is and to realize that the chairman of the board had given him the role of bait. He explained that it was all because of his tag, which starts signaling like an alarm clock when a predator comes near. He added that this is so that the scum of the earth would flock to him in a frenzy, and he could kill them at that moment. So he asked if he was really ready to do it. Su-nam emphasized that the chairman of the council said that he was the right man for the job, and that no one else could do it now. Song Si-yeol jumped out of his seat and started shouting that he would only do it because they wanted to force him. They were shouting and arguing so loudly that their classmates heard it and were surprised by the tone of their conversation. Sunam tried to calm the boy down, but he wanted to kick him out of class, explaining it in a rather strange way. He said he was not going to talk to some rabbit anymore, and that was the end of their conversation. At the first lesson, their classmates said that the professor would not come today, so he asked them to hand in their homework to him. He also added that since they were doing assignments instead of exams, he would check attendance. And he asked me to come up and write my name and class number. Song Si-yeol was angry. He listened to the students complain about the professor because he made them all go to class instead of conducting them online, and he just kept silent. He felt that the professor was angry and couldn't let the situation get worse, so he took out an extra notebook. He needed to do everything he could to get closer to Song Si-yeol, because the chairman of the board had ordered him to do so. Eventually, a guy who was a substitute professor approached Song Si-yeol and asked him where his homework was. He admitted that he hadn't done it, expecting to be scolded and given a warning. However, he slammed a pile of papers on the table and said that he could send them to the post office. He added that only he was allowed to do so. Song Si-yeol was shocked and said that he didn't need to do that. He also asked to take the points away from him. The man put a check mark in the document opposite the subject of politics and diplomacy, noting that he would owe him for today. The guy emphasized that if he asked him out for a drink, he should go to a bar with him at least once. Song Si-yeol grimaced and said he didn't want to do that. He also asked him to wait, explaining that he would do everything himself. He opened his laptop and said that it would take him half an hour to write the assignment. He also added that he didn't even think about burdening him with unwanted connections, so he asked him to leave him alone. Meanwhile, Sunam was sitting in the school lobby looking at his phone screen, where Song Si-yeol's number was displayed. He sighed heavily, not knowing what to do now, and began to recall the conversation with the head of the board. Back then, the woman had asked if she and the boy were really studying together, and remarked that it was very good, offering him to work with him. However, when Sunam was surprised at the offer, she smiled and explained that Song Si-yeol was dealing with the brutalized beastman who had a damaged mark. Sunam smiled and remarked that he could hardly handle such a job. Then Yang Yun-hai asked if his tag reacts to the pheromones of dangerous predators, those who are stronger than him. And without waiting for an answer, she added that since he was a cross between a rabbit and a dog, his place in the food chain was at the bottom. Looking at the embarrassed boy, she explained that he was a weak species, and that was why he had many enemies. That's why the tag reacts to many beastmen. In addition, she noticed that, on the other hand, he has a well-developed sense of smell and sight, as well as a quick reaction. Yang Yun-hai told us that Song Si-yeol takes a lot of time to find beastmen who have gone berserk, but he has almost no enemies. That's why his tag doesn't respond. She emphasized to Sunam that, on the contrary, if he stays close to the boy, he will make his job much easier. And, of course, he would be able to protect him from the revenge of the beastmen who targeted him, because, by nature, predators who occupy a high place in the food chain cannot harm those who are lower down. Sunam remembered her words that he needed to stay with the boy in order to survive. Closing his eyes, he realized that it was true, because the monkey who tried to kill him was dead. Therefore, the words about revenge were not groundless. It was based on the fact that she might have a family that might want to take revenge on him. However, he did not consider himself guilty of anything. He suddenly jumped up because he realized that he had not killed the monkey, so he should not be responsible for it. His thoughts were interrupted by the pain in his hand under his watch. Sunam picked it up and finally realized what was happening. As the tingling continued, he realized that it was an alarm, meaning that a predator was near him. So he hurriedly grabbed his bag and started to run away, because the predator was dangerous, first of all, for him. And while he was running, he tried to figure out what to do next. He was also looking for a place where he could hide safely. However, he suddenly felt that someone grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. His heart started beating faster, and his body was trembling with terror. Fortunately, it turned out to be Song Si-yeol. He noticed that he was very scared, so he asked what was wrong with him. He also asked where he was running to and why he was in such a hurry that he wasn't even looking back. Sunam could not explain to him. However, he felt that the pain in the area of the mark on his wrist subsided at that moment. It turned out that Song Si-yeol had noticed the boy at school. He was walking down the hall and happened to see him in the window. He started to worry that something might have happened to him again, so he decided to catch up with him. So when he grabbed him, he started asking him why he was so excited and why he was scared. Sunam put his hand to his wrist and explained that it suddenly hurt. It was similar to what happened last time, so he assumed that there could be a predator nearby. However, Song Si-yeol asked the surprised boy if it was true that he said he was a cross between two species. He replied that it was. After saying that, the man grabbed Sunam by the arm and ordered him to follow him. He explained that he needed to check something. A few minutes later, they arrived at the office of the Department of Politics and Diplomacy. It was empty and quiet. Sunam did not understand anything, so he asked the guy to tell him what he wanted to do. The guy silently sat down on the couch, closed his eyes, and in a calm tone ordered him to take off his clothes. Sunam was going crazy. He could have expected anything, but he couldn't even think of something like this. However, Song Si-yeol was very insistent and told him again to take off his watch, socks, and everything else. Sunam tried to ask him why he had to do this so suddenly and what it would do for him. He emphasized that according to the guy, he should have two markings on his body, which means that there are two danger sensors that alert him to predators. So he said that he needed to check if it was really true and wanted to see them with his own eyes. Sunam began to take off his shirt, remembering what the council chairman had said. She said that for the beast men, the marks are proof of their existence and also their weakness. So, now he did not argue and obeyed the order, because the very existence of this mark is a matter of reverence for humans. If the mark is destroyed, it will be a devastating blow to the beast man and will turn him into a beast. Therefore, by all means, it must be hidden, especially from such predators. Song Si-yeol noticed that the mark on the boy's arm was still red, so he realized that he had indeed just been chased. Suddenly, the boy began to feel uncomfortable. He asked if he could just tell me where the other mark was, because it was a place that was embarrassing him. However, it only irritated him. He began to say that it was a matter of life and death, and emphasized that he had to check it out for himself. He started asking the shamed boy what size it was, whether it was clear or blurry. However, he said that it was in a place that even a public bathhouse doesn't show. Song Si-yeol was furious and started screaming, asking where the hell the mark was. In the end, he had to show it to me, looking down. It was a rabbit mark on the inside of his thigh. It was smaller than the dog's mark, but they were both quite clear. So Sunam asked if it meant that he was closer to the dog than the rabbit. Song Si-yeol was not expecting to see this, so he barely had time to cover his face with his hand from surprise. In the evening, he stood on the balcony and recalled everything that happened in the office and could not believe what he felt. After the guy asked him if he could get dressed, he could hardly contain his emotions and replied that he had seen everything. After that, he ordered him to get out of here. However, when Sunam asked if that was all, he asked if he wanted to ask him to reveal his mark as well. The guy emphasized that this is usually the way they do it, according to the rules. He also added that his tag was responding. Song Si-yeol explained that she was fine now, although the guy started asking what he should do in such cases next time. The guy started to get angry and said that he was quite annoying. However, he started taking off his clothes, explaining that it was only because it was a matter of life and death. Finally, he threw his shirt at Sunam and ordered him to wipe himself from head to toe with it so that his scent would remain. However, this only amused the boy. He assumed that among beastmen, it is also possible to deceive hunters with the scent of another predator, just like animals. Suddenly, Song Si-yeol ordered him to run home as fast as he could before the scent disappeared, as bestiality relies more on the sense of smell than on sight. He also explained to the boy that if predators smell the scent without even seeing it, they will think it is somewhere nearby. After that, he frowned and started shouting even louder for him to wipe himself off and then get out of here. A few hours later, Song Si-yeol was having dinner with his grandmother. She asked him if the rabbit was doing well at school. When he replied that he was, she emphasized that from now on, Sunam would be in danger. The woman explained that the monkeys are quite friendly with each other and would not be happy to learn that a member of their family had died chasing a rabbit. She also added that he had gotten used to the role of an ape man. Song Si-yeol tried not to react to her words. However, when she started to worry that she might be killed, he couldn't stand it. He slammed his fist on the table and asked her what she wanted from him and why she was annoying people when she spoke in the dialect, even though she could speak normal. The woman said that she thought he should look after the rabbit until it was completely safe. She also asked if the man needed a reason to speak her native dialect. She also explained to him that he was a predator anyway, and she added that the agreement on ethical behavior has a clause on the protection of weak species. Meanwhile, Sunam sat at his computer and tried to find at least some information about bestiality on the internet. However, suddenly his phone rang on his desk, and to his surprise, he received a message from Song Si-yeol. Sunam's joy was overwhelming, as he asked him to go outside immediately because he was waiting for him. So, in a few minutes, he went downstairs and met the boy, happy that he had saved his number. He also wondered how he had gotten his address. However, without explaining anything, the man startled him with his question. In all seriousness, he asked the boy how fast he could run 100 meters. Sunam was surprised, but he thought about it and replied that he didn't really remember. Maybe it was 15 to 16 seconds. He said that he thought it was an average result, albeit from his high school days. Song Si-yeol looked him in the eye and told him to follow him if he still wanted to stay alive. Thus, in a few minutes, they were already at the stadium, checking the boy's physical fitness, which was not very good. Sunam fell to the ground because he felt like he was going to die from shortness of breath. In turn, Song Si-yeol yelled at him because he had run in 22 seconds. So he assumed that the guy didn't have a mark, but just a tattoo because he couldn't run that badly, even by human standards. Sunam explained that it was just unexpected. He also added that many years had passed since his demobilization, and he did not need to run. Song Si-yeol was surprised, as he thought that bestiality was exempt from service. Sunam began to cry and explained that he did not live thinking that he was a human, and if he had known that, he would not have joined the army. The guy explained that he could be sure, because if he had a mark, he was definitely not human, and since he is a cross between a rabbit and a dog, he should be able to run 100 meters in 5 seconds. Sunam smiled and asked how he could learn to run so fast in such a short period of time. The man told him to stop taking the medicine his parents gave him because it was the medicine that prevented him from doing so. However, he said that he was not taking them anymore. He also recalled that the chairman of the council had also told him this. Song Si-yeol touched Sunam's leg with his foot and asked him if he knew where a dog or rabbit was in the food chain. After that, he answered that they can smell, they have excellent eyesight, and they are very quick and fast. Song Si-yeol said that all this means that they have many enemies and their lives are in constant danger. So quickly recognizing the threat and running away is the most important thing for them. Looking him straight in the eye, he added that since they are weak, the only way to preserve their species is to actively reproduce. Sunam continued to listen to him say that if he wanted to survive in the world of beastmen, he had to run hard. However, he was surprised by something else, namely the shape of Song Si-yeol's pupil. But he continued and emphasized that he needed to awaken his natural instincts and run like never before in his life. He emphasized that until he could run 100 meters in 5 seconds, not 22 as it is now, he would not leave him alone. and only then would he let him go. Sunam smiled and asked if this meant that they would train together all the time. He replied that it was the least he could do for him. After that, he advised him to get up and start all over again. The guy emphasized that he would not go home until he improved his time by 20 seconds for today. However, Sunam asked him to wait. He said that he was interested in what he had said earlier, namely about reproduction and whether he could get pregnant. Song Seol turned in his direction but did not answer the questions, which seemed strange to him. He kept running, although he didn't understand why he was so angry. In his mind, he could have just said no. Song Seol was angry, thinking that the guy must have a lot of energy if he was talking nonsense. Suddenly, Su Nam started laughing as he noticed that his ears were quite red. Song Si-yeol, on the other hand, stood there furious because he didn't understand what the hell he had imagined the Beastmen to be like growing up. Although he assumed that to ordinary people, Beastmen might seem like monsters. One day, Su Nam accelerated so much that in the process he could not stop himself. He realized that he might fall, but there was nothing he could do. Eventually, Song Si-yeol stepped on his foot, stopping him and emphasizing that he was not using any force at all. He explained that when he runs, he has to push off the ground with his toes. Then he added that when landing, the heel should touch the ground first, not the fingers. Song Si-yeol squeezed his hand and told him to run as if someone was chasing him, as if his life depended on it. He also said that he was half rabbit and half dog, and the latter had almost the same speed as him. Rabbits are even faster than him, although dogs are very different. Sunam asked who he was. He remembered that he was a mix of a dog and a rabbit, but he still didn't know what markings he had and how many of them he had. He started pulling on his shirt and emphasized that he had recently shown him all his marks, but he hadn't fulfilled his request. However, Song Si-yeol became very angry and asked if he had forgotten how he had almost torn him to pieces. He also gritted his teeth and asked if he should bite the boy again so that he would finally come to his senses. In the end, Su Nam returned home very tired and barely made it to bed. He could not believe that he had to lose his property. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and he still couldn't accept the fact that he was turning into a dog. He recalled how Song Si-yeol asked him if he had forgotten about the bite or something, and wondered if he wanted to do it again. When Su Nam heard about it, he confirmed that he was indeed right, and he wouldn't be able to do it again. He pointed to his hand and emphasized that it was impossible because it was a real danger to him. Song Si-yeol was surprised and asked if he really believed in the law. Su Nam replied that he was trying to. He gritted his teeth and said that the dog had told him that, but the man laughed and said that he was the target race of the dog and the rabbit. Su Nam asked him if it was true that the rabbit did not react to its sworn enemy. However, he said that this character had not yet awakened in him. After that, he told him to jump out of here quickly and he would go rest on the bench instead. Su Nam suddenly began to ask him if he wouldn't jump like a colored arrow on a pacemaker himself. Song Si-yeol turned around and emphasized that he couldn't even play at that time, and said that he had 22 seconds to do it. Su Nam said that regardless, the dog's inclinations are stronger. He added that his mother told him that he had puppy eyes. However, when Song Si-yeol said that he was very interested in whether he would become a dog, he became nervous and replied in the affirmative that he would definitely do it. The boy looked around, sighing heavily, and said that he had once had a dog when he was a child. Su Nam could not stop looking at the guy's pupils, so he started looking for information about it on his phone, assuming that it could be a cat, a crocodile, or a snake. The next day at school, he casually opened his locker door and looked at its contents. He wanted to order a courier to his home, so he thought he would do so after a while. Suddenly, a bottle of pills fell into his hands, which he had almost forgotten about, even though he had been told to take them. Su Nam took one in his mouth, but it turned out that he had no water. So because of this, he had to swallow it like this. And while he was doing this, he saw that a person he knew was standing next to him. So he said hello to him. However, the man was stubbornly silent, not responding to his words at all, not even turning in his direction. Sunam asked what was wrong since he had just spoken to him. He replied that he heard everything, but he was not interested in talking to him. But the guy didn't listen to him. He came closer and said that he had thought about it a lot. He also emphasized that he had an interesting personality. Song Si-yeol asked him if he wanted him to take care of him. Sunam, curious, tried to ask him who he had chosen and said that he liked In-gyu. Song Si-yeol got angry and told him to guess who he was. However, he noticed that he could feel his excitement. He also added that sometimes his pupils become narrow and it looks really cool. So he suggested that he could be a cat, lion, or cheetah. Song Si-yeol slyly looked him in the eye and said that it was true, and he was the largest species. However, during this conversation, Sunam began to feel that something very strange was happening to his wrist. Meanwhile, Song Si-yeol approached his face and advised him to guess the rest. However, the guy refused and said he would do it next time. And when he asked why, he replied that everything was fine and asked him not to get so close. While Su Nam was saying this, he accidentally touched the curtain, which was very sharp, with his hand and got hurt. It was very painful for him because he got a rather large scratch on his hand that was bleeding. Despite this, Song Si-yeol's reaction was very strange. He grabbed the guy's arm and started pulling him somewhere, emphasizing that he wasn't going to hurt him. And when Sunam tried to ask where he was taking him, he ordered him to keep his mouth shut and not make a sound. Finally, they went to the restroom, which was empty, and locked themselves in one of the stalls, slamming the door. Song Si-yeol leaned the boy against the wall, holding his arms above his head, and approached his wound with his face. After that, he drank all the blood from the scratch to make the boy feel better. However, Song Si-yeol was very dissatisfied. He wondered what was wrong with his blood, so he asked if he was diabetic. The blood had a strong odor. It also had a sweet taste. So the guy explained that it was because he had bitten him. Sunam did not know what to say. Touching his wrist, he begged the boy to stop screaming and wait. He told him that the mark under his watch was hurting him badly and that it was causing him to tremble all over. Song Si-yeol was surprised, but he explained that it wasn't his fault because he didn't mean to hurt him. Sunam began to feel very sick. He kept repeating that he was in pain and said that he would have to tell the chairman of the council. No matter how hard Song Si-yeol tried to justify himself that it wasn't his fault, he couldn't retract his words, as he felt nauseated by the ants and the speed. He was hot, dizzy, and felt like he was going to faint. Song Si-yeol couldn't understand what was wrong with the tag, so he just tried to hold him up so he wouldn't fall. In fact, Sunam knew that this was his natural enemy, so he decided that he needed to run away from him first. He was left alone in the restroom, not realizing what had just happened. He thought the guy's behavior was strange, but decided not to run after him. Meanwhile, Sunam was trying to find a place where he could hide as the older one from the threat of predators. He realized that he needed to get out of here, but he had no idea where he should run to now. As his hand was shaking and the mark was getting more and more red, he realized that it could be very dangerous. However, as it turned out, the boy did not fully understand everything, and he had been waiting outside the school for a long time. At some point, he felt someone running behind him and trying to grab his shirt. Sunam didn't understand who it was, but he assumed it wasn't Song Si-yeol because he was running faster than him. Some time before, Yang Yun-hee had advised him to stop taking his old medication and start taking a new one called Nutritional Activator. When Sunam asked what it was for, the woman said that the pills could be used to summon Song Si-yeol. She explained that helping them with their affairs should never put him in danger. She added that if he took the medicine, it would be easier for Song Si-yeol to find him wherever he was. Luckily, the boy managed to escape and hide behind a corner. He sat down on the ground with his hands on his head and tried not to look from which direction he was being chased. It was very scary for him to realize that the man definitely did not look like Song Si-yeol, and if he did, he would have caught up with him. The boy realized that it was unlikely that he could not be found because he was hiding here. So it turned out that this stranger was not from their school. Sunam was going crazy, not realizing who it was and why he was being chased. And at that very moment, the man appeared nearby. Sunam covered his ears with his hands because on top of that, he also began to hear some strange noise around him. However, it didn't matter anymore. A stranger in a hooded sweatshirt and an axe in his hands stood in front of him. He angrily swung and started shouting, asking Sunam when he had managed to run here. The boy was terrified and realized that his life would probably end now, in this corner not far from the school. However, Song Si-yeol started running towards the noise. His speed was lightning fast, so in a second he was there. The man froze when he saw that Su-nam was not alone, because he didn't expect to have to fight with someone else. Finally, the guy listened to the sounds of a fight and shouting. Then, suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. Holding his hand in a fist, he angrily emphasized that he could smell a stench no worse than that of monkeys. The man tried to reach for his axe, which was very close by. However, he was crying out in pain because Song Si-yeol stepped on his hand with his foot. After that, he began to ask who he was and how long their gang had been targeting the boy. Then, raising his axe, he asked if he should force him to talk with his own weapon. Song Si-yeol offered him something else. He said that he had the option of showing his mark instead of answering. Waving his gun, he emphasized that if the man was making a lot of noise, he must have a cool mark. However, the man, in fact, turned out to be a common low-grade scumbag. Song Si-yeol was devastated. He said that this time he really had nothing to do with what happened. Sunam finally smiled and agreed with him. He felt much lighter, so he didn't see any danger anymore. The guy was puzzled and asked why he had run away and if he still didn't believe him. Sunam sighed heavily and said that was not the reason. He also explained that he had a bad headache and a strange ringing in his ears. He added that he seemed to be whispering, but in the end everything sounded as if he was speaking into a microphone. The voice sounds like an echo. Song Si-yeol began to stand up and explained that it was because his instincts and the sign were gradually revealing themselves. He assured me that he would soon return to normal. Suddenly, Sunam started to talk about this half-man, but the guy interrupted him. He was surprised to say that his inscription was fine and assured him not to pay attention to it. Plus, there were no CCTV cameras nearby, so he could relax. Sunam noticed that in this case there was a possibility that they would come for him again and asked the guy to help him. He replied that it was all true, so he decided to mark the bastard by cutting his arm up to the shoulder and leaving a huge scar. Sunam exhaustedly tried to get up, with the help of Song Si-yeol, and asked what he should do now. The latter tried to explain to him that this kind of thing would happen again in the future, and recalled that the boy had volunteered to take on this task. Looking around, Sunam suddenly began to say that it appeared that if they acted together, he would ensure his safety. Song Si-yeol was puzzled to hear this, so he asked what he meant and what was going on. Sunam smiled and explained that he was just remembering a conversation with the chairman of the council. He also asked the boy if he would protect him in case of problems. Song Si-yeol did not believe that he had volunteered to be a decoy. He believed that he was only doing it because he thought that if he was next to a stronger man, he would be able to survive. Sunam emphasized that he had no other choice and could not escape, recalling the situation with the monkey. And when he pressed his head against the boy's chest, he added that it was also very good to make friends with someone who was also half-human. After that, he told him that he was a little scared at first when he found out that he was a snake and apologized for it. Song Si-yeol irritably grabbed his arm and emphasized that if he had already decided to follow him, he was absolving himself of all responsibility. In fact, he realized that the chairman of the board shouldn't have used Sunam like that, because the stupid rabbit hadn't done anything wrong. In addition, he was so entangled in this case that he had no choice but to become bait. This guy has always lived like an ordinary person, so we shouldn't expect anything out of the ordinary from him. However, Song Si-yeol also pointed out to him that he was the only one who wanted to stay with him, so he reiterated that he would not be responsible for him. Finally, while he was opening the door, Sunam began to complain about what would happen if he got hurt and died, because it would be the boy's fault. Song Si-yeol gritted his teeth and got very angry, because he didn't like being spoken to like that. Sunam smiled and said that he also knew that, and that's why he came to help him today. He wanted to continue and tell him that the boy had even taught him how to run away, but suddenly he felt his head was getting blurry. Song Si-yeol didn't understand what was happening, but he thought something bad was about to happen. And he was right. At that very second, Sunam fell to the ground with a thud and stopped moving, which scared him quite a bit. He ran over to him, knelt down and began to lift him up, worried that he was still alive. However, when the guy reassured him that he was not dying, Song Si-yeol asked him to pull himself together and offered to take him home. However, when he held him in his arms, he refused, as his parents did not know who he was and that he was a beast. Song Si-yeol explained that he was not a beast, but a hybrid, that is, a stupid rabbit. He also asked why he hadn't told them everything yet. The boy's whole body was shaking, but he emphasized that he was not a rabbit and felt like a dog. The boy replied that he didn't like dogs either, although Sunam pointed out that he was lying, because he actually had a friend. The boy closed his eyes and, barely speaking, added that dogs are very loyal and never betray. Song Si-yeol said he didn't care about that and asked if he had ever seen a snake befriend a dog. Sunam said that snakes are cold-blooded, and now he doesn't wonder why he has such a tough temper. The boy asked if he could be quiet for a while. However, he was told that if he was silent, he would think he was dead. Sunam woke up and looked around. A light was shining in his eyes, so he was afraid that he might be in a morgue. His head hurt a lot, but he tried to remember how he got home and why he felt like he had been beaten. When he came out of the room, he saw his parents standing in front of him, who were happy that he was awake and asked him how he was feeling and if he was in any more pain. The boy replied that he was fine and asked how he got home. His parents said that he was brought home by one of his classmates, who explained that a soccer ball had hit him in the head at school. So, they started to worry if he had a concussion after that. The boy replied that he did not and confirmed that it was true. He was also happy that Song Si-yeol brought him home and came up with a great excuse.